Good afternoon, everybody. This is Michael Bracy, welcoming you to the Friday, April 22nd edition of Music Cities Together Live. I'm joining you from just outside of Washington, D.C. As always, we appreciate all of you joining us for these conversations about music and music communities in a time of COVID, in a time of crisis and shutdown. We've got a great group of guests joining us today, and we're going to get right into the conversations in a minute. Before that, a couple of ground rules and background for those of you who have not had a chance to join us before. Again, our program focuses on perspectives from different types of music stakeholders from all across the world. We have all these programs available at our archive on the Music Cities Together YouTube page. Our producer, Alex Dolvin, is going to be putting links to that and other relevant information into the chat window as we go through the program today. If you have questions for our guests, you can put them in the Q&A window and we will answer them as possible. If you have more broader comments, questions, ideas, suggestions, you can always hit us up at musicpolicyforum@gmail.com. Again, musicpolicyforum@gmail.com. And again, Music Cities Together Live is a production of Music Cities Together, which is a partnership between Music Policy Forum and Sound Music Cities. So every week we begin with a couple of updates. Another fucking week, everybody. But things are moving. A couple of things we want to shout out. Again, we've talked in previous weeks about our appreciation and admiration for the National Independent Venue Association and the great work that they've been doing in terms of advocacy and organizing for independent venues in the United States. They've launched a really effective campaign called Save Our Stages. We'll put that up in the chat window, but that is a super easy platform for you to email your legislators, let them know that you care about the importance of live independent music and of support for venues. Again, as we've talked about in previous weeks, Congress is debating whether or not to put additional support out in terms of the federal investment. We're going to know what that looks like the next couple of weeks. And, again, I think our assumption is that there will be legislation coming, but whether or not there is legislation or if that legislation includes specific resources for music venues or for the live entertainment industry is yet to be seen. So we certainly want to hold up that campaign. And I also want to shout out what I thought was a really excellent article that came out this week in the Austin Chronicle. Again, Alex is going to put that link in there. That went deep with venues in Austin to really sort of unpack some of the intricacies and some of the questions around what it means to reopen live entertainment and what that's going to mean in a music-centric city like Austin specifically. And later today, we're going to be joined by Cody Cowan from the Red River Cultural District, who represents venues, works with venues, and we'll talk in more detail about what's happening with venues in Austin and some of the challenges and some of the debates happening in that community. Finally, I want to just give a quick update on our Reopen Every Venue Safely initiative that many of you in this conversation are part of. Again, we have launched officially with 10 pilot cities in the United States and parallel programs taking place in the UK and Canada. REVS has a pretty simple mission. We want venues opening up as quickly and as safely as possible. So we want venues to be working closely with their local and state governments, with the public health departments, to really understand the protocols and the mechanics of what it's going to mean to reopen, what type of equipment that requires, what type of supplies, who's going to get the supplies, just sort of the intricacies and the practicalities of live music starting up again. But then what we're particularly interested in is what is the communication then with music workers, including touring artists, including their crews, venue staff, and of course audiences, because it's our feeling that if we're not having that very sort of transparent and honest and effective conversation about the realities of live music reopening, then we're nowhere. And we really have to focus as much attention on that as possible, as early as possible. So the REVS initiative has launched. Again, Alex put the link to the website in the chat. You can follow us on the mailing list, and we'll be sending out updates specific to that as we go. So now, with that background, this is, I think, our ninth Music Cities Together Live program, and we have been very mindful of the fact that for a show that is supposed to be about music, we've been featuring musicians, of course, and discussions around music. We haven't actually played any music yet. And we're going to try to rectify that by sharing with you what many of us feel is one of the most compelling, if not the most compelling, pieces of new art and music that has been released during the crisis. And thankfully, it is the product of our first guest, the spectacular Thao Nguyen of Thao and the Get Down, Stay Down. So to set the stage and open up the conversation, we're going to have a very laggy 2.5-minute presentation of Thao's new music video, Phenom.
Sip on joy, the purest drink. Move to make, thought to think. They can feel us from afar. Avenues and boulevard. White collar cannibal, what you gonna do? Everyone's attending, so who you gonna choose? I will not equivocate. If that's all, let's celebrate. Shamefully, shame's claim on me. Led my life with infamy, but I don't call it, I don't solve it, I dissolve it famously. I've been so politely at the bottom, pull it tight, bootstrap, strap it on and top 'em. I've been so politely at the bottom, pull it tight, bootstrap, strap it on and top 'em. In the past, I was patient, now I'm so tired. Fever issue, I will not drop it. Power, cowards never stop it. I have nurtured you, corrupted. I am erupting, don't interrupt it. Careful, I'm an animal, trap. First of the secondary class. You know I don't trust you, it's the catch. Don't you fucking touch me, I will nash. Cause I am an old phenomenon. And I am an old phenomenon. Show them we believe, see the unforeseen. Sharpen canine teeth, get those ringside seats. When the scorched of the earth come back by sea. Sip on joy, the purest drink. Move to make, thought to think. They can feel us from afar. Avenues and boulevard. So politely at the bottom, pull it tight, bootstrap, strap it on top. I've been so politely at the bottom, pull it tight, bootstrap, strap it on top. I've been so politely at the bottom. 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 I've been so politely at the bottom.
So clearly, Thao's Zoom meetings are better than our Zoom meetings, but thank you for letting us share that. And now we're really excited to bring in Thao Nguyen from the spectacular Thao and the Get Down, Stay Down, and Joe Goldberg from Brilliant Corners Management. Thank you both for joining us this afternoon. I think you're both muted.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having us. It's good to see you, Michael.
It's good to see you, Thao. And we're going to talk about a bunch of stuff. First of all, congratulations on the album. And, full disclosure, we've been friends and colleagues in activism for a long time. And I just have such, personal fondness and investment in you as a human being and you as an artist, and just so appreciate the work. And I'm very fortunate to know this album is a personal album. You're writing about themes having to do with your family and your identity and your life journey and things that I've been fortunate to kind of be tangentially not involved in, but, I know your mom, et cetera. And so it's especially meaningful for me, but it's just, it's a beautiful piece of work and thank you. And it also, obviously sucks that you released it in the middle of a pandemic, so release day was last Friday, right? The 15th?
That's right. 1,000 years ago.
1,000, yes, years ago. And how are you? Well, let's just start there. How are you? Where are you? You're in Oakland?
I'm at home in Oakland. I'm doing well. I mean, as well as we could hope for. And happy to be here to discuss the greater inner workings at play and take a step back from our specific release. But
that's awesome. That's awesome. So just a couple pieces of housekeeping. We're going to put the Bandcamp link up for the new album Temple, which again is amazing, and everybody should go buy it off of Bandcamp or your preferred. I should have checked with you guys. Are we good with Bandcamp? Is Bandcamp, are they okay?
Love Bandcamp.
Excellent.
God bless them.
Yeah, right. So buy it on Bandcamp and buy the vinyl and then put it onto your Spotify playlist, whatever you do. And we're also going to post a link to an interview that Thao did with our friend Emily Fox from KEXP this past week on the Sound and Vision podcast. That is really a deep dive on the art and sort of going deep on a lot of the songs and sort of the underlying stuff, because it's a spectacular interview. And Emily is able to talk about that much better than I can. So, hopefully everybody watching today would like to go and learn more about Thao and her journey and this album, and that's a great place to go. But we're going to talk more about the mundane stuff, about the mechanics of the music community and the music industry and, how this is sort of going. So before we get into that more boring stuff, the turnaround time on the Phenom video is kind of neat. And, we're all zoomed out. And we're all bored of Zoom. And I think you anticipated, kind of where we're going to go with this. But am I right that you turned that around pretty quickly in March, right? I mean, you sort of saw this come in and you're like, let's get this together.
I would say, the turnaround was exactly a week. Yeah. Because Joe suggested moving the original treatment of the video, which by then had been canceled, moving it to Zoom. And that was a Monday, and by Tuesday, the video was delivered. By the next Tuesday, the video was delivered. Yeah, and you're right. That urgency, there were a few things at play. One, it's such a novel format. Working within this medium is so of the moment that it could be easily to our detriment. Two, the fatigue. Three, that creative energy was different at that time because it was right at the beginning of what we were beginning to understand as something monumental, but we weren't sure yet. And so I think levels of despondency hadn't kicked in. It just felt like a kinetic energy we could capture, and we're still in a place to.
So Joe, bringing you in, albums have cycles. There's a whole integrated, you're getting the music out, you're promoting the music, you're building awareness, you've got the social campaign, you've got just the visibility, you've got the tour, all the integrated pieces. Could you speak a bit to kind of like how you thought the year was going to play out for Thao and for the band?
Yeah. I mean, Thao, when did you finally turn this record in? What was
December 30th or something.
Yeah, I mean, we'd been working with Ribbon, Thao's label, and talking about release date and timeline, and working with Thao's booking agent at Paradigm, Hallie Edrick, on the touring. And the plan was that the record would come out on May 15, and even at the beginning of this pandemic, I think we sort of we had a hope that our tour that was slated for mid-June, that we were lucky. We were lucky that we weren't out on the road when this thing hit. Right. A lot of artists got really, really crushed by that. And we thought we'd be okay. That we'd get a handle on it early, and testing would get figured out, and we'd know where we were at, and we'd be able to kind of proceed forward. And so, yeah, I mean, that was the initial plan. And I think we announced the record in mid-February. And so we were about a month into the sort of setup when this all went down.
Mm-hmm. And so what can you share about trying to promote a record in this time? I mean, it's a lot of this, I assume it's a lot of conversations, a lot of interviews, a lot of podcasts.
It's a lot more, it's on my end at least, and I'll let Joe speak to, Joe and the team have had to devise, obviously had to pioneer different ways of releasing a record in a pandemic. But on my end, it seems like there's the same amount of press. There's less phoners and more, which I kind of miss, actually. I would rather do a phoner than a FaceTime, whatever. But I think the requests, there's more Zoom stuff. There's more, obviously, live streaming songs and so on.
And I think one of the go ahead, Joe.
Yeah, it's so. It's sort of. There's a few things to it. I think a lot of, if an artist putting out a record right now, you don't know when you're going to tour, and in some ways, that can be very frustrating. I think, with the record announced and the first song out there and a plan in place, we sort of felt like, well, this is sort of an opportunity to just, be creative. We've got a great record. It's done. We're not trying to figure out how to go into the studio or how to, create. We had things finished. And so a lot of it was about, okay, we've got these finite limitations. What can we do creatively to highlight and spotlight the record? And, also there's so many outlets. Everyone's at home and they're looking for content and things to get behind. So, some people took the calculation, okay, I'll move my record back to next year. There's already so many records that are going to come next year. We had sort of momentum and marketing behind us already. So it's actually sort of, you're always trying to figure out, okay, well, how can we find our lane? Because there's so much music and so much stuff going on. Usually this one actually kind of felt like, we're going to have a lane. If we can be creative, there's not a lot of other people who are in motion right now. So I think that's something that we tried to take advantage of.
That's interesting. And we talk a lot, and Thao, you and I have worked a lot around sort of helping people understand, again, people outside the music community or don't live this stuff, understand the importance of non-commercial radio and all the infrastructure that they bring to the music community to kind of promote new music and create platforms for it. Certainly, you've had a great relationship with public radio for many years. Could you speak a little bit about to that aspect about how important they've been and just trying to build visibility for this project in particular?
Oh yeah, they've been so remarkable. And as a side note, I will say the opportunity to thank people, public radio, for their support of my career over the years has been a sweet part of being more available in some ways and being more in touch. I think one of the difficulties we've run into is how to show our gratitude for that support and be a part of the way things have had to move online to such a degree, how to maintain the intended musical integrity of the music we want to share in this new setting, for instance, a live stream. How to be a part of the programming that these public radio stations would like us to be involved in, and be so grateful for that, but also figure out how to best serve the music under these conditions.
Yeah, and something that I think has been a really challenging dynamic. So first of all, the reason we all do this work, and we all have done this work collectively for a long time in terms of the music activism work, is that the overall structures are deeply flawed and sort of vulnerable anyway, right? So we move into this era of shutdown from a starting point that is already deeply challenged and hard to kind of navigate how to kind of get through that. And then I think something that I think we're very mindful of, and we hear a lot in conversations, are that part of the reason that we do this work is because the role of art and the role of music and the role of musicians in the lives of so many people is completely out of balance in terms of the value proposition. And I know that like you are an artist, and I don't want to flatter you, meow, 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 but I mean, you're someone who people deeply connect with you. Your fans, when you're playing a show, that room, you're bringing something into that room that is extraordinarily meaningful for a lot of people, many of whom you of course will never meet and are just kind of projecting, what their friend Thao is like. And I think that that's something that concerns all of us because, musicians already, virtually every musician is already extraordinarily economically vulnerable. I think part of the challenge in the music industry is that the economics are so uncertain that creates an ongoing level of stress and anxiety for, again, virtually every musician or person who works in the community, because you don't know what's coming down the pike and you can't really project for that. All you know is I've just got to work my ass off and try to make stuff happen. And when everything freezes, then for some musicians, then you're put in also in the position of, okay, now I have to be the voice who can then articulate the catharsis around what my people are feeling. And I know, like Joe, some of the other artists that you're working with in your management company have been doing a lot of home concerts. I don't know if you could speak to some of that, but, just the effort to kind of, be present as human beings who also have a gift and are able to bring voice to complicated times has been kind of remarkable to watch in real time.
Yeah. I mean, it's, that's been, just personally uplifting for me to see that and be a part of that. I mean, Ben Gibbard from Death Cab for Cutie, I think it must have been, a couple days after the sort of the shelter in place really took hold across the country. We asked him if it was something he was interested in and thought maybe he'll go on and do, play a few songs. And he immediately came back and was like, I'm going to do this every day for the next 2 weeks, and then proceeded to play like an hour concert every day, which was really, really amazing. And as far as we hadn't, our company, as artist management company, really try to kind of support our artists and whatever they're trying to do creatively that makes sense from a strategic marketing, creative, all that stuff. It was, he wanted to do it, and 2 days later wanted to be on air, and we were figuring out which streaming platform we were going to use, and settled on one where we could simultaneously broadcast from YouTube and Facebook. And we're sound checking over Zoom and on the cell phone, and producing, whatever live stream concerts. It's been great. He's been able to raise a lot of money. Josh Ritter is another artist who's been doing that. The artists who've got a ton of songs and can just do it with their acoustic guitar, makes that easy. It's more difficult for some of the artists where it's got to be full band, and you can't do that. You can't sync up over Zoom. It doesn't work.
Right. So let's turn a little bit to getting back out on the road. As we said before, the point of our REVS initiative is not to set a date when we would like to see venues open or try to push that forward. What we're doing through REVS is basically saying at some point there will be the go ahead. At some point, public health will say, it'll be different in every community, but now it's okay to do this. And so again, we want this to be as fast and as safe as possible. And we want to make sure that music workers and venue workers and audiences understand what's happening with this. So I know you can't really speak to calendars. I know you've had shows you've had to cancel. I know you were at one point scheduled to perform, I think, in 5 of our pilot cities, so you were hitting a lot of the communities that we're working in with the REVS initiative. Could both of you speak to, and you may not even have your head around this yet, but just when you're thinking about putting yourself into a venue, putting yourself on the road, bringing crew and band members with you, inviting audiences, fans in to see you, what are you thinking at this point? Like, what are you feeling, and Joe, and on the management side, the tension between, obviously it's your job to help your artists and, thrive, financially, and it's hard to do when you're not on the road, but obviously that there are trade-offs. So Thao, why don't you start? I mean, are you even thinking about this yet, or are you just kind of let it play for another month or two and then just kind of get your head around it, or what?
I've not thought a lot about it. Aside from my gut instinct is to say that I wouldn't feel comfortable touring until there was a viable vaccine readily available. I think moving through areas with such varying degrees of response and local government accountability, whatever. It's at such, it's so nascent at this point that I haven't considered it much. And it's only been the question of safety.
Right. Right. And Joe, what are you hearing, and especially from your artists, and starting just to get your head around this question?
Yeah, I mean, I think pretty much all of my artists sort of echo Thao's sentiment about sort of when they're going to feel comfortable going out and touring. It's a really a wait and see. There's there's conversations happening. Our internal team, we've got a conference call every day where we're talking about what all of our artists are doing and what's going on out there. And then we're doing, regular sort of connecting with other managers and just folks in the industry. There's a lot of articles going on right now about concerts at drive-in movie theaters and venues at, large capacity, but only having, a couple hundred people in a 1,200 cap venue. I think it's, from a manager's perspective, it's really, it's wait and see, unless there's an idea that really just feels like it's going to make perfect sense. I can't, looking at some of the videos and the photos, I can't wrap my head around, putting an artist in a drive-in movie theater to play a concert. If it was something they were passionate about trying to make happen, I'd help them. But, it's a little depressing. So I have to say, even some of the photos of looking at these venues where it's, you got 200 people spread out in seats, and yellow caution tape in between them. I mean, it's just not what live music feels like for most of the bands I work with, where it's so much about community and being close together. Right.
Well, it's obviously it's a moving target, and we're going to be smarter in 2 weeks than we are right now. And I know we're all watching anxiously to see what happens in the South and of the United States and some of the communities that are starting to reopen and how that's going to play. And, we'll be talking to Cody in a minute about Austin and what's happening in Texas, and they're in the middle of a lot of this stuff. So we certainly will be smarter. And I think, just to build on what you're saying, Thao, I mean, I think you've been pretty open also about the fact that touring's hard, right? I mean, it's not,
I've been excessively open about it, I think, because it has been, even in, obviously before all of this, as you said before, it is such a razor thin margin of everything. At every level of sustainability, it's dubious. And we were already considering how responsible is it to be touring in the way that we would have to be touring environmentally. And, there are other issues of the economics of it. When we are actually ready or able to tour again, I don't know what our band makeup will be, because I don't know what kind of work our band members, I don't know what kind of work we don't know who will be in a position to resume the touring life, or what kind of work or negotiations they would have had to make in the meantime.
Yep. So we have two questions I'm going to kind of synthesize, and then we'll let you guys go, and really appreciate your time. And these are really interesting questions, and I'm not sure that there's easy answers to either. But one is, so there's two significant areas of growth in the industry that have happened as a result of the shutdown. One is the sort of acceleration of virtual touring models. Again, Erin McCown was with us last week talking a lot of the work that she's been doing out of her home in Western Massachusetts. Is that something that is appealing, or is something that you're looking at doing more structurally, either in terms of a virtual tour, or just putting more emphasis around your virtual events? And Joe, that's for you. And then Joe, if your other artists are kind of thinking about making more of a pivot towards integrating that even in a post-COVID world. Why don't we start with that one?
Should I go, or for Joe first? Yeah, I'll go. I've been reticent to acknowledge the necessity of the pivot. And I think, honestly, it would be a matter of what is necessary financially. And if that becomes, which could be very soon, then I'll consider it more. I think it sort of hurts my heart to have to present live music in a virtual format. Yeah.
And Joe, is there anything you want to add on that, or I can pivot to the second question real quick?
Yeah, I mean, it's something that seems to be sort of the next step in this is venues are starting to talk about when we can put, when you can have a crew go in and the musicians, going in and doing a full band live show with no audience and stream that over the internet. And I think that that's something that is I think that you're going to start to see that in the fall or over the summer, and already that venues are going to be available. And if the musicians are all in the same city or can easily get to each other, that is going to be sort of a stopgap measure that I think people are looking at.
And we have another question, which I almost feel like is almost quasi-rhetorical, and I'm not sure, Joe, if you're going to have a clear answer to this but it's building off the observation that certainly before the shutdown, overall global music industry projections in terms of the size of the industry have been showing tremendous growth because of consumer adaptation of paid streaming services. And of course, the economic shutdown is going to create some tension there, and we'll see what comes out the other end. But we have a question about just the challenges of, again, the overall economics of the industry just booming, but that a lot of that revenue not making its way down to whatever. I don't even know. Do we call people independent artists anymore? What's the language now? What do we call your client base? I'm old and call them independent artists, but who gets that money, and how does that happen? Is that something that again, I think that structurally is one of the challenges of the community that a lot of us are trying to engage with and have for a long time. And I don't know if there's an easy answer there, but I don't know if you would have any thoughts or reflections on that dynamic.
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting because, I mean, in one sense, streaming music in a time like this, it's so great that we can all just be in our homes and have access to all the music that exists, and we don't, have to put ourselves in danger or put other people in danger to go out and buy records. The other side of that is, independent record stores. That community is such a huge force in promoting new artists and new music and allowing new artists to grow and build, as imperfect as that is. So it's it's really, and then of course the economics of how the money flows in streaming. I mean, it's terrible, and it's really difficult because in one sense it's like these industries, the streaming growth, we still haven't reached the maximum capacity. Something like this is really growing things, and you need to allow for industries to grow. So it can be understandable that the economics may not be great for artists as you're trying to help grow a new distribution system, but artists only have the cycle that they have. It's what does it do, Thao and the Get Down, Stay Down, to put everything into growing an industry that 20 years from now is going to be mature. So it's
it's a monstrously important question, and something I think we all are very mindful of. And again, it underscores why Music Policy Forum and a lot of us have done this work for a long time, because we've got to be thinking structurally, even certainly post-COVID as well. So you guys have been super generous with your time. Thank you, Thao, and thank you, Joe. Best of luck to both of you. Everybody go buy Thao's record. See her on tour when she is back on tour, and all that good stuff. So thank you, guys. And now we're going to bring in Cody Cowan. Cody, if you could unmute yourself there with your awesome Austin, Texas background. There you are.
Hi.
Welcome. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. I want to say how brilliant. I mean, kudos, Thao. It's so inspiring. I was like tearing up watching it. I mean, sincerely, Yeah. It's beautiful.
Yeah. Such a badass. And anyway, Cody, I'm so happy you're with us. Cody is the executive director, I think is your title, right? I'm sorry, I get lost in titles. So the Red River Cultural District in Austin, Texas. And why don't we start just to give a little context for those who are not familiar with the Cultural District, and specifically kind of that sector in Austin. Tell me a little bit about what you do and how you got started, and some of the history of your work leading up to this point.
Yeah, thanks. So Austin has a long history with live music. We've had documented performances of large artists all the way back to the 1920s. In particular, in the past 40 years, music has exploded and grown downtown. And the Red River Cultural District exists between 6th and 12th Street downtown. I mean, if you've been to Austin, you probably know where UT is, you know where Barton Springs is, you probably know where Whole Foods is, and you also know where 6th Street and the venues are downtown. It's like, so the Red River Cultural District is that concentration, including about 17 live music venues in this like 6 blocks of downtown Austin. I was born and raised here in Austin and started playing music in like straight edge hardcore bands with friends in the 90s. And then later went on to work at the legendary Emos for about a decade, and then ran the Mohawk, which is still on Red River down at 10th and Red River for the past 10 years as GM before developing and pivoting into the role that I'm in right now.
And so Austin has been such a fascinating city, obviously, because it has the reputation, obviously, for live music. And obviously, again, this is a global phenomenon, but certainly for a lot of our audience members who haven't had a chance to spend a lot of time in the States, one of the structural challenges we're having is communities that are sort of identified or thought of as being sort of music centers or hubs of independent music has really helped driven, again, development and sort of pricing and real estate. And there's been kind of this cycle of, thriving live music ecosystems leading to being, kind of priced out and shut down and not being able to sustain, because the economic model behind independent music and independent venues really is not meant to work in Lower Manhattan in a time of massive Whole Foodsism or whatever we want to call it. So my sense of your work, Cody, with the Cultural District is kind of growing out of a recognition in Austin that maybe the reality of what's really happening and the trends that were happening over the last number of years may not meet the sort of perception and sort of the hype around what does it mean for Austin to really be thriving as a music city. Is that true? And can you speak to kind of like before the shutdown, kind of what you've been doing the last couple of years to sort of galvanize, support, and advocate on behalf of that district?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so I mean, if you're a music fan, you probably heard of Austin, and I mean we somewhat arrogantly took the moniker of the live music capital of the world in the early 90s, much to the locals' laughter. But at the same time, we have an over $2 billion economic impact locally as a music industry. And it has been identified in terms of government and tourism as the largest driving indicator of the rapid growth of Austin for the past 10 years. So, we kind of gravely laugh that we've become victims of our own success. That success has translated to financially to the larger ecosystem for the city, but not to musicians and not to the working class creative culture. I mean, it's kind of an interesting study in socioeconomics and history. Live music venues historically have popped up in distressed areas. I mean, you're referencing like New York City. I mean, all uniformly, the venues that you look historically as the rad, badass, cultural, creative centers all grew up in really sketchy parts of town, right? So it's a story of distress and how those low rent and low costs and less, we'll say, more scrappy neighborhoods allowed for live music to occur. I mean, it's not every neighborhood association is going to be really stoked on live music. But that has pivoted over the course, particularly of the past 40 years, which I think is the most relevant time period to examine, to where, with the new urbanization and growth of modern cities globally, you're seeing the rise of those costs and the challenge of affordability. So even before COVID, we were already in one economic disaster, which was affordability, which is really what created the opportunity for what I'm doing now at the Cultural District. I mean, again, I'll put it into context. In Austin in 2003, when I moved back from San Francisco, I could rent a one bedroom in a duplex for $150 a month. Mm-hmm. And now most rent for one bedroom are probably going to be closer to $2,000 a month. Exactly. Nothing has changed in terms of wages, right? Yep. So that's a good example of affordability. And certainly that's true for venues. I mean, the Mohawk's rent was probably $10,000 12 years ago, and now it's creeping up on 30. So, you just do quick math there and see what sort of challenges there are economically. And as an industry, how it's been impossible for us to adapt quick enough to meet that in terms of revenue, in terms of licensing, streaming, all of these pieces. For every opportunity that emerges, so does another challenge.
Right. And I think it should be said that one of the interesting things about Austin as sort of an incubator for these policy conversations is that Austin has had previously and has to this day some really smart people working inside the city who understand the complexities of these conversations that are really trying to help work with you and the rest of the industry to say, how do you puzzle us through together? So it's been, these collaborations that, again, our friend Don Pitts has been behind, that is being continued at the city level by a lot of great people. We're thrilled, again, that Austin is one of the pilot cities in our REVS initiative, and they're really taking the reopening conversation really seriously. The state is engaged. I mean, so there are a lot of players, and I think part of what's really cool about this and about the work that you're doing and your colleagues in Austin is that many cities they're not even engaging in the problem, right? So it's good that at least, there's an effort to say, let's try to get our head around what the dynamics are, why this is important. And then of course you've got the unique driver of South by Southwest as just, so important for the economy. And certainly, you take your members out of South by Southwest and it doesn't really exist anymore. I mean, that's it, right? That's the heart of that festival.
Yeah, it's funny. I mean, and you and I have been talking for at least a year or two plus at this point. And folks come to you as they come to me, and they're like, how do we have a thriving music city? How do we have this cool thing? I mean, these are all pre-COVID conversations, obviously. Yeah. And inevitably, the finger points back to Austin. It's like, how do we become the golden goose, like down there? And the stark truth is, this was all an accident. It was an accident of history, of being a youth culture center with the University of Texas, of affordable rent and affordable spaces that largely transformed from being DIY spaces into professional venues. And then really largely on the back of the success of South by Southwest. I mean, we wouldn't have a third as many venues as we did in February if it wasn't for that. And we wouldn't have the economy that we did without it. I mean, for instance, venues income is anywhere between 15 to 60% coming from South by Southwest alone.
Yeah.
So that's like a terrifying dependency, but also shows the vitality and importance of South by, which is like venues is also, a big question mark in terms of survivability and longevity in the future. I mean, a lot of friends who are still working over there and a lot of friends who've had to been laid off with everyone else. It's a scary time.
So you've put some pretty interesting and provocative and concrete proposals on the table that I want to kind of go through in a little bit of detail. Before we do that, I want to flag, we've got a great question coming in from London from Agent Squires asking if there is a society or organization in Austin focusing on independent promoters. And she flags that the London Promoter Society has about 1,000 grassroots promoters that all are working for the greater good of music. Are you seeing, obviously you've got the venues, you've got city government, are you seeing the promoters in that conversation as well?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, to that question, so far we don't see one organization that's kind of an umbrella for all those efforts. Mm-hmm. But, to your point, there's been at least a 30-year history of advocacy here for music, at least. And I'm probably the third or fourth generation inside of that. Yeah. And Don Pence, you mentioned, is one of my mentors and who kind of his work inspired me to get into the game. But those promoters right now are working with us in the Cultural District. They're working with Music Venue Alliance, which I'm sure you've heard for those of you in England. A lot of the work there has inspired us because particularly London has been at the tip of the spear in terms of the affordability challenge and a lot of the negative outcomes that we've seen. We also have Music Makes Austin, which is an umbrella organization that includes NVA, RRCD, South by Southwest, C3, and a bunch of other musicians and promoters, as well as now NEVA. So the promoters are 100% engaged in this. I mean, the cool thing locally is many of us have known each other for 20 or 30 years. We all grew up together. So even if we're a fast-growing city of 2 million, it still feels like small town anywhere. I mean, everyone's communicating. Everyone needs each other for all of it to work.
Right. So I want to turn and we're going to try an experiment in running through a PDF form, which, I mean, my God, we're going from Thao's artistry to looking at PDFs. But,
it's a hard follow.
Yeah, I know. But Alex, if you could call up this Red River proposal. So one of the things that, Cody, we were really excited by is, how do I say this politically nicely? There's a lot of 10,000-foot rhetoric going around right now about the power of music and the importance of music and yay music cities and go team. And there maybe is not as much as there needs to be from our standpoint, very specific proposals being put on the table that are saying, here's the need, this is what we think could address the need, would you please do this? And you came out with this cultural tourism and live music recommendations, live music economy recommendations a couple weeks ago. And I just think it is so smart. And I also think, and we can talk through this a bit more, and I could be off base on this a little bit, but I also think it's presented in a way that it's not demands, that you're not, saying if you all don't deliver on this, you all don't support music, or, you're not trustworthy partners. Oh, sorry, my computer has an error. I thought that was up on Alex's. I thought we were getting Zoom bombed again. My sense is the way you present this, I love your take on this, but it's being presented from a sense of partnership and collaboration. But it also is very ambitious and very aggressive. So why don't you start, if you could, by just talk through very quickly, like big picture, what is this document? Like where did this go? Who created it? Like what is the kind of the macro intent of what this thing is?
Yeah. So a quick bit of context. First with the Cultural District, South by Southwest success in downtown Austin created the Cultural District by virtue of so many music venues and other music-facing businesses in terms of economy popping up. So this document really focuses on that because it both is the driver of identity and culture in Austin, as well as economy, right? So there are lots of venues in Austin. Again, only about 17 of those are in the district. Mm-hmm. But this is where the magic happens in terms of economy and in terms of these are the spaces that Thao are playing, right? Where you're seeing a confluence of local scenes, national and international touring, and just vibrant employment and interaction. So and the other part of this is basically was based on a conversation that I entered into in 2014 when I started my advocacy work as GM of Mohawk. This has contributions from Don Pitt, from Bobby Garza, from everyone that I've worked with and known for the past 5 years. Some of this include projects that I've been actively working on at the city for 4 or 5 years that haven't come to fruition. So for myself, this was kind of like a final statement about music economy and the probable outcome of live music. Again, if I want to make a grim setting for this, there's an expected 90% loss of live music venues nationally. NEVA has charted from its 1,600 members, including venues that everyone would know and recognize nationwide. To the earlier point, it's a cost-heavy business, and few people own their land. So the inability to be open and having shows means you can't pay rent, means, here we are 60 days into it. Your likelihood of still being viable, open, or not bankrupt in the next 60 days is low or non-existent unless you have personal wealth or access to that. I mean, your business is in trouble, right? So this is the setting of this. So as the live music capital of the world, I felt it was important now more than ever. And again, I was working on this before COVID, but COVID kind of pushed the timing up to say, here we are, live music of the world. Let's go over what has happened and what's transpired in the past 60 days. And where do you, council, and where do you, Austin, stand on wanting this? Because from my point of view, as well as from the perspective of others in NEVA, the live music industry is over, right? So I just want that to sink in, because expectations of returning to February are impossible, not improbable at this point. So what we do, this doesn't mean we're not going to see Thao on a stage 6 months, a year, whenever is appropriate from now. But will there be any stages, right? I mean, we pray to God Thao is there, and she's looking healthy and making rad art. But, those venues and those places are probably not going to be there, particularly without any public funding and a recognition of what music as an industry contributes both to bottom line and to us in terms of our humanity and in terms of our identity. So that's just, I think
I think that framing is critical. And I mean, I know we're not going to give it, let's just do a kind of snapshot overview of some of the recommendations. And then Cody, where does this document live? Is this online where people can find it, or can people email you or me to get a copy of it, or what's best to get this actual document?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. I've been intending to put it on the Cultural District website. It's not there yet, but if anyone is interested, and again, it's pretty dense stuff, please email you or I'm happy to get it to you.
Great.
But the top level view is there's several ways to help businesses. One of those ways includes a bucket of money, and the other way includes removing barriers, right? So I went down the list, and I wrote this with feedback from many partners in our community in Austin. And I went through what that list looks like based on real, actual costs and needs. And I'm happy to walk through that with you.
Yep. So Alex, why don't you advance to the document, and just Cody, shout out that I really think the preamble is super effective, because you're laying out some real specifics in terms of what is underlying your thinking. So that's some very effective advocacy. All right. So I think we can kind of sort of read this, but again, why don't you just do kind of some snapshots? And there are a couple of extraordinarily provocative ideas here, which are actually not that unrealistic. They just are different thinking in terms of activating them. So let's go through a few.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, we can skip the whereases. I'll just say in short, that's creating a narrative in a legal terminology that shows why these things are needed. So full stop there. And I'll also contextualize the document by saying every market, both in the municipally and state level, is different. Like Texas, in terms of our constitution and what's legally allowed, is much different than other places. So there's pros and cons to every place. But here's what we're dealing with in Texas and in Austin. To the point I made earlier, I'm asking for basically $2 million per month to be allocated from CARES to pay basic costs, particularly rents for venues. What has been indicated globally is that small businesses in developed nations have on average 30 days of operational cushion.
Yeah.
Venues are the first to go and will be the last to show as socially facing businesses, right? To Thao's point, how comfortable is she going to be playing in front of a group of people before a vaccine? I mean, right. I've heard this said time and time again by musicians here and workers. Not very or not at all is usually the answer. Yeah. So to keep these spaces able to be reopened at some point, you need this life support, right? You need life support. This next line item is live music fund.
Cody, I'm sorry, just one piece of clarification and then just a time check. We're going to go 10 minutes late. If you have time, can you go to 2:10 your time?
Yeah, I can push.
Yeah, so let's go for another 12 minutes just because this is critical information. And just a flag for those who are not following CARES, again, we are hoping and expecting that Congress will be appropriating potentially another $3 trillion. Again, that's, in the negotiations right now. But part of, I think, what you're asking for is as money is going in to shore up state and local budgets, that you would like some of that money to be allocated towards venues.
Correct. So the city of Austin was allocated about $170 million. And of course, the need by everyone far outstrips that amount. Yep. But our proposition is, as the live music capital of the world, quote, if we want to have that economy restart eventually, it has to be still existing. Quickly, we were able to secure funds from hotel occupancy taxes into a bucket that allowed us to ramp up and talk about spending that to subsidize local live music performances. We're on the edge of getting that there. So we're asking, instead of pilfering this before it's ready, let's use this to reemploy musicians when that time is ready. Similarly, regressive taxes, those costs that disproportionately affect working people and small businesses, like parking, right-of-way fees, and fees for activating on sidewalks, as well as reinvestment fees for say to the point that we'll talk about soon with REVS. If we want to be safe, we got to have clean bathrooms. We got to have clean experiences from point of check-in to bar to stage. This requires additional money. This requires additional investment. These folks don't even have money to pay rent right now. So I was proposing that let's reduce or remove down these fees and costs, knowing that this isn't one of those buckets of money. It's just something the city already does, and it could be a really easy lift for them, right? Radically proposing for city land purchase trust, this $35 million for the cultural district. If we could receive $35 million and create basically a music development movement, then we can purchase these venues who, already some of them are being shopped by landlords for sale since the market is so scary right now. Then we can retain these things. So I'm basically creating a menu in multiple pronged attack where how do we keep them alive? How do we retain the land? How do we make it easier when it's safe to reopen? And y'all are probably aware that Texas has already issued reopening. So many businesses are continuing to be reopened. How do we make this environment the safest and easiest to work, short-term through long-term? Is kind of the top level view. It's
awesome.
Holistic in its vision.
Yeah. So, and I'm sorry, Cody, is that it for the doc? Is there more?
We looked at homelessness as well. Again, homelessness, our community is disproportionately affected in terms of homelessness, mental health, and addiction as a music community. Also, downtown in our district are the only existing shelters in Austin. So there's this challenge between us wanting more robust service for those individuals that are experiencing homelessness. We've been advocating for that for years as well. Also understanding that sadly and tragically, the homeless population has largely been forgotten here and everywhere inside a pandemic. I mean, it's shocking and it's, I don't know what else to say. It's shocking.
Yeah. So where does this document go? So Alex, why don't you turn off that, and thank you so much for running through. Oh, we got some good questions coming in too. So the document is sent. Where does the document go?
So I shared this with Austin City Council, as I knew that CARES money was up for allocation and debate, and thus far we hadn't found an avenue forward that would allow us to get in the bread line, so to speak. Mm-hmm. So I shared this with council. This was taken up by council and press here. We got 2 resolutions that came out of the mayor's office and council member Tovo's office. She, of course, is the representative of the district one of the representatives of the district that the cultural district lives in, and we've had essentially all of these items in general adopted into resolution as of yesterday. So that's good news. This is spiritually the biggest victory we've had in music advocacy in Austin in the history of music advocacy. Now, that's different than a check for $35 million and getting the CARES money. So we haven't gotten the results yet. So that's why I'm not popping champagne bottles yet or, patting folks on the back.
So is this essentially, a conceptual agreement that they are in line with your values if the resources are available to try to put all the pieces together? Is that how you would think about it?
It's that, in the addition of directing the city manager and city staff to go and explore this and in particular cases make it so. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Obviously, the larger ticket items are more of an exploration with $35 million and this ask of $2 million per month for the venue ecosystem. But nevertheless, if you're not in the bread line, then you're not going to get bread. So whether that means it's this allocation of the CRF or the next one that will be coming from the federal government. I mean, at the end of the day, we're talking about federal dollars. I mean, local municipalities can't keep up with housing insecurity and food insecurity. So here we are.
Yeah. And this has been, I think, I hate that this has had to be crisis driven. Unfortunately, most advocacy is crisis driven. But I think one of the most interesting developments over the last couple of months is the potential to have the national venue infrastructure then tied into what have been basically locally driven organic mobilizations like the Chicago Independent Venue League and the work that you've been doing in Austin and the work, again, we've talked a lot about the success in King County with the Seattle area venues coming together and getting a commitment of public dollars from King County that's going to be matched by philanthropy. So, it's really interesting because, again, the ultimate challenge that we always talk about is, if the next phase of the CARES bill goes through, what are we talking about, like $8 trillion are going to be invested of federal money, this year. And of course, the money, it always goes to the people who are organized and who know how to get the money and who have their act together. And the only way you can do that, by definition, is by having the ability to organize these interest groups, basically, to say we have a common agenda. We have problems that are important to policymakers at all levels. These can be fixed through resources or through policy, or they can be addressed, not fixed, but they can be mitigated. And this is how we're going to do it. And so this long-term potential of these, the local organizing, linking up to the national policy networks to then make more concrete asks that don't necessarily have to be coming out of crisis, but coming out of a fundamental rethinking about these cultural structures, gives me encouragement long-term, so that's, and again, I keep repeating this, but this is why you've done this work for a long time. This is why we've done this work. We've done this work to try to help create the infrastructure to address these structural challenges. And so it's very natural for us then to pivot in and say, okay, what are the realities of today? How do we address them? Who needs to be in that conversation? What can be done? Again, not at the philosophical, romantic, isn't music great level, but at like literally how are we going to make this shit happen? So it's
absolutely.
We're definitely getting questions about the doc. And I'm going to ask Alex, I don't even know if Zoom allows a PDF to be linked. So why don't you play with that, Alex, and see if it's possible to do that? But I would encourage people who want a copy of the formal document, just email me at musicpolicyforum@gmail.com, and I'll be sure to get it right out to you. And Cody, your information, I think, is on your website if people want to ping Cody directly.
Correct. Thank you.
Yep. Awesome. Well, we could have gone for a lot longer, but Cody, obviously, we all really appreciate your work and appreciate, again, the leadership of the whole community in Austin as an incubator of all the structural policy work that we all are trying to do. And I know you couldn't be successful if you didn't have excellent collaborators who are willing to engage with this work and be thought partners with you and really try to, again, engage in the problem solving piece. So I know I'm going to end with a dumb question that I don't really want to know the answer to, but it sounds like this weekend may be a little complicated down there. What are you anticipating just in terms of the messaging around reopening and the mechanics of what may be happening in Texas and specifically in Austin? Do you have a sense of what this might look like?
Oh, providing a short answer is difficult, but I'll say that the big picture, I'd say the majority of live music venues are going to wait and see. But again, the business model, 25% of reopening is still 100% of nothing. I mean, you can't make rent off of 25%. You can't make rent and payroll off of 50%. Yeah. So I think by virtue of that, which is kind of behind the CARES ask, the majority of venues will stay closed. Those that have more robust or we'll say their business model isn't supported directly by music. It's part of their business model, like restaurants and bars who provide live music experiences. I think we're going to see a lot of those popping back up, and the rest of us as an ecosystem, the community is understanding because everyone's desperate to survive right now, quite frankly. Yeah. But we're all waiting to see what the consequences and outcomes from that will be. I mean, again, until Thao is comfortable touring again, the idea of live music venues going online again in the way that we know and love them and experience those shows, it's not going to happen. And I support that decision.
Yeah, Cody, that's a great way to kind of wrap this. I think, again, congratulations and thank you for your work and thank you for spending time with us today. And next week's our Music Cities Together live program next week is going to dig into another piece of this, which is we're actually welcoming our friends from Music Canada who are going to be walking through some very sobering polling data that they've been putting out in terms of public attitudes towards moving back to live music and what audiences expect to see and need to see before they're willing to come back. So again, that's the other leg of the stool that we keep talking about with REVS, is how are we not only doing the best job possible around the safety and around the security issues and the public health piece of this, but then also like who needs to know those messages, who needs to know what's happening. So Cody, thank you. Alex Dolvin crushed it again. There's a temporary link to the document that he created, a quick Dropbox, but then if you can't grab that fast enough, or if you're watching our archive, again, just email me at musicpolicyforum@gmail.com and we'll make sure you have the document. I know Cody will be doing all sorts of Zooms in the future with you in other cities, collaborating, strategizing, and brainstorming about how to take some of these concepts and take them to other cities and vice versa. So I know you're excited about that, and I know that we're all exhausted from Zooms, but we will be looking forward to doing as much of that as we can handle. So with that, again, thanks to Alex, thanks to our partners at Music Cities Together, thanks to all of you for participating in the show and the great feedback, and we'll see you next Friday. Thanks.
Thank you.